I feel like I'm taking this show off tonight because I got a terrific guest and he's going to tell some great stories.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
You know, when a player in the media, a journalist, retires, it doesn't take long for absence to really make the heart grow even fonder. And Paul Kenyon's retiring from the Providence Journal, I think, has left a significant hole in that newspaper. He's going to fill it for you because he's written a book. Good evening. Nice to have you in. We're going to spare the rundown this evening on this Friday night if you're seeing the program for the first time. I'm sure this conversation is going to be so good and so exciting and enticing for you to go buy the book that we'll probably play this on a number of occasions over the course of the balance of 2016 and beyond when we take days off or have holidays or our tummies don't feel so good or whatever. Here's the book. Well, here's the headline about the book. Jim Donaldson, his counterparts at the Journal, talking about Paul Kenyon's book. And it's always a good sign when your former day-to-day comrades are promoting you. It's a sign that the locker room was a good place to be.
They've been very good to me. It's been an interesting experience seeing life from the other side, being the one interviewed rather than doing the interviewing. But I'm enjoying it. It's filled a time for me to write the book, and now going about this aspect and trying to get people to read it. It's been a lot of fun.
37 years at the Journal.
37 after 6 at the Patuxent Valley Daily Times and 7 at the Pawtucket Times. So I retired on my 66th birthday, 50 years after I began.
You know, I still remember the evening with the public address at URI when we announced your retirement. I was so excited to do that, and I had a little lump in my throat when we were talking about it, and you know, it's not usual that someone who's supposed to be a critical eye on a program gets honored by the program, but that was a special night, wasn't it?
It most certainly was. It's very, very special, and the reception that night and kind of a second retirement party at the Pawtucket ballpark at McCoy Stadium with the Paw Sox, who were equally nice to me. It brought back some wonderful feelings, or gave me some wonderful feelings, because I spent 50 years doing a job I loved, feeling very lucky to be able to do what I was doing. And to finish that 50 years and have people say you did okay was rewarding, very rewarding.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it was exclusive to you did okay. I think it has a lot to do with you're okay. I think the feeling that people have had about you and the way you conduct yourself and do business I mean, I'm not going to overstate it. You and I know each other from the road. We've been friendly with each other. But if someone asked me, you know Paul Kenyon, I'd say, great guy. It would just come right out of my mouth because it's the way you deal with people and have dealt with people. And I wonder, clearly it comes naturally. I wonder how that impacted the work that you did, your disposition, your way of carrying yourself.
It was a major part of it. It was me. And I advised my kids, I advised anyone who asked that whatever you do, you have to, A, enjoy it. You better be happy when you wake up in the morning and say, what a great day I'm going to have at work today. And you have to treat people fairly. And honestly, that's all I did, was try to treat people the way I would want to be treated. And it made for a great life. Again, when you're going to an athletic event, getting paid to do what other people do for their relaxation, life is good. And I tell a bunch of stories in there, beginning with the one where my son made me feel especially good when he was trying to decide what he was doing for college, that it was a great life. And the last words in the book are, I am a lucky man, and I sincerely believe that. I've had a great life.
Well, listen, I want to cover some of the coolest stories in here, but I also don't want to spoil all the stories for everybody. I can promise you, I was just saying to Paul prior to the broadcast, I just finished a novel. It was 528 pages and was hard work, psychologically and emotionally. I'm going to get a chance to read this thing, and I bet you when I sit down, I better be able to park 2 or 3 hours. You could probably get through it. Newspaper writers have a way of writing that makes it easier, it seems to me. Is the book and the stories that you tell really just another extension of some of the great pieces that you would have written in the newspaper?
Yes, I did not change my style one iota. Going back to college at the University of Rhode Island, the professor who taught all the practical courses was a man named Wilbur Doctor, who had worked at the Providence Journal for a long time and then going down to URI. And he was one of the great influence in my life. He got me my first job, he got me started in this. And Wilbur's favorite saying that I probably heard him say 300 times in the course of 4 years was, if you're going to work for a newspaper or anywhere in public, you should write to express, not to impress. And that kind of became my credo, was when you're telling people a story, make sure they understand it, make sure they don't have to struggle to follow it. There are writers who are hailed as some of the best writers in the United States these days. Just Charlie Pierce comes to mind as a sports person. He's a major league guy in sports. He's a fabulous writer. He's outstanding, and he's national good. He's 4 levels above me. I could never write like Charlie Pierce. But Charlie Pierce is difficult to read in some sense. Let's say politically, George Will is another one in that category, where they're so sharp, so brilliant, and they want to let you know how brilliant they are. So there are 14-letter words in every sentence.
And you got to read it 3 times.
You got to keep going back and what's he saying? Wilbur Doctor hammered home the point. If you're working particularly for a newspaper, people are sitting there in the morning having their coffee or at night after work. They don't want to fight. They just want to understand what you're saying. So write so people can understand.
Talk to me about the world of sports journalism. I'm sure it's changing as much as any other industry is changing. Media is changing like crazy. It is a very different world than, for lack of a better term, traditional journalism. In some ways.
Oh, it's always been very different, and the difference is even wider now than it's ever been before. I mentioned in the chapter in the book about newspaper changes. I feel fortunate because when I was the occasional sports editor at the Pawtucket Times in the 1970s, I would put out the newspaper, and part of being the editor, you're working with pen and paper, making corrections on paper, then sending it down to the linotype, these big machines where they retyped everything, and lead came out. And each page weighed about 100 pounds. So you were going down, working with the guy who was in charge of the sports pages. They would run the ink out, you'd print it, you'd see if there were any mistakes, make corrections. If it was too long, you had to make changes. But literally every page weighed 100 pounds. It was the same way Gutenberg did it 500 years ago. And I lived until we went through television and cable television, and of course the internet, which has changed everything so much more dramatically. And as I say in the book, the changes in newspaper evolution got me my big job. Dick Reynolds retired in 1977 from the Providence Journal because they were going to computers. Nobody had ever used computers for putting out a newspaper. I got the job because he didn't want to switch. I retired in part because my job became more tweeting and blogging than writing for newspapers. And frankly, I was getting old and I was having trouble keeping up with everybody tweeting and blogging. So I literally have lived through the entire gamut of how the world has changed.
Well, that's fascinating. The idea that the social media pressures that are now on a lot of us, I don't succumb to them very much, not yet anyway. But it's part of the business now.
You literally have to do it, or you can't survive.
But something tells me that you're versatile and you know, a big thinker enough to be able to say, all right, I can deal with that if I still have a burning desire to cover every day. I mean, right?
Yeah,
there had to be a combination more heavily toward quality of life and I'm done and I like to write a book type of thing rather than just the social media pressure getting you out of business.
Yeah, frankly, health was a big problem where I had some health issues and I'm struggling, and working Patriots night game where I'd get home at 3 o'clock in the morning became a major hurdle for me.
Sure.
Doing Red Sox baseball games where you're driving to Boston and typically working from 1 in the afternoon till 1 in the morning became a challenge. And
not all glamour.
It's not. It's
work.
as with everything else, there's a job to do. And when your deadline is 10:45 and the Red Sox are still playing in the ninth inning at 10:45, it's a lot of work because you're writing.
But you're
at
also
least-
kind of a slow learner on that health issue thing. I mean, you had a scare back in 2000 that we don't have all show because I got a lot of stories I want to tell you. But the story of you writing through a heart attack is legendary.
Again, I talk about how lucky I am and how much I love my job. And again, growing up Catholic and believing strongly in God, you wonder why things happen the way they do. And in the year 2000, I was a Patriots beat reporter, and I was going just for Patriot games, so maybe 30 days a year. So 330 days a year I'm home. And on the night of 9/10 leading into 9/11/2000, the Patriots played the Jets in the Meadowlands in a Monday night football game. I got sick at halftime. I felt like I had the flu, no chest pains. I felt lousy, and when I went back, Jim Donaldson is sitting next to me, and I told Jim I'd back away a little bit if I were you. I might be getting ill here. And Jim, being Jim, said, "What?" and did back away and made jokes along the way. And bottom line is, the game ended. I did the best I could to do my story. Jim ran me some quotes because I couldn't even make it down to the locker room. And I had driven Jim and Kevin Mannix of the Boston Herald to the game. So as we're leaving at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was struggling to walk. And the parking for reporters at the old Meadowlands was a considerable distance away from the gate. Anyway, they wouldn't let me leave. They asked the security guard if a doctor was still there. There was, at literally 1 o'clock in the morning. I went and see the doctor. He asked me what's going on, gave me a nitroglycerin pill, told the medics, take him to Hackensack University Medical Center, which is the heart specialist there. And at 7 o'clock the next morning, they were doing an emergency triple bypass and saved my life. And as they later told my wife, that the real heart attack comes afterwards in these type of situations where people feel ill, they go to bed and never wake up. With me, I was on the operating table and the doctor saved my life. And it affects you, it impacts you. Like, why me? Why wasn't it one of the other 330 days and I would have died at 52 years old? Instead, somebody's taking care of me, and I have a strong belief that there's an influence there. And the combination of somebody taking me and Jim Donaldson and Kevin Mannix and the doctors and everybody else, now I've gotten to see my kids get married, and I've got 3 grandchildren, and I'm still here enjoying it and writing books about it.
A couple more stories when we come back. One of the greatest putters of all time, no doubt about it. I'm lucky enough to have had him on the program on a number of occasions and consider him a friend, and he actually helped my putting. So you know that guy dropped me 5 shots in 1 year, from an 11 to 6 handicap. Of course, if I could just remember what he told me, I could. Paul Kenyon with us. The book is 50 Years Covering New England Sports, and it's about people, not just the games. I start with Brad only because he's a local story. He and Billy Andrade have made an incredible remark in their careers. Billy playing on the senior tour, and of course, Brad dominating now, I think, the Fox broadcasts in a way that is perfect for him. You love those guys. You love covering those guys.
I make more than one reference in the book that where I covered thousands of people in 50 years. There are some people who are special, and the 4 people who are on the cover, to me, are the most special people. And again, it's New England, but it's primarily Rhode Island, and all I've known in my life is Rhode Island. And our state is a better state because of Dave Gavitt, Brad Faxon, Billy Andrade, and Ben Mondor.
Yeah.
And the first golf tournament I covered in 1974 was the Rhode Island Juniors at Pawtucket Country Club, won by 14-year-old Brad Faxon. I never stopped covering him for the rest of his life. I literally wrote hundreds of stories on Brad and Billy. And you and I were just talking at the break. They're both the same people now. I think it's one of the greatest things you can say about a successful person, that they're still the same person after the success as they were before. And in Brad and Billy's case, they've won both won upwards of $20 million playing golf. But they've raised that much and more to help their state. They've both since moved their prime residences out of the state of Rhode Island, but they both come back, and they've raised 20 some odd million.
What do we don't know? What do we not know about them?
The references I make that some people know are that they're great athletes. People put down golf, and golf's not a sport, and the people who don't play don't know. And both of them are fabulous athletes. Brad was the Rhode Island State table tennis champion at 16 years old. Again, a generation ago when there were such organizations. Billy pitched, we're in the Little League playoff time, Billy pitched Bristol to the state Little League championship as a 12-year-old, and then was a prep school all-stater at Providence Country Day in basketball. And they were going to be very good at whatever they did. And the fact that they've taken golf as their prime way of making a living, they're in their 50s now, and they're not only continuing, but they're thriving as much as they ever have.
You missed the golf beat?
Very, very much. Although the good news is, not entirely, because I'm still working for the Rhode Island Golf Association.
Still writing stories.
Still writing stories that now that appears on the internet.
Right. On the rigalinks.org, you can find the coverage. The RIGA has done a nice job in growing their coverage by themselves, because there's not enough space in the newspaper anymore for the
Exactly.
amateur events and all that kind of stuff. And you know, there are a lot of guys, you know, I don't play at any kind of level anymore, but there was a moment when I actually thought about playing at a certain kind of level, and, you know, you think, geez, well, maybe I'll make a cut and surprise somebody, and maybe Paul Kenyon will have to talk to me at the end. In fact, I do remember being at some qualifier where I blew up and shot 90-something, and you were there, and you asked me, how'd it go, Dan? I just kind of went, no interview today, Paul. There's no discussion going on here today, but there's somebody else you want to talk to. Where does golf rank in terms of your love-to-dos? You were a hell of a basketball writer, hell of a baseball writer, football, the whole thing.
Not close.
Not close. You
Not
love
close.
it. Absolutely love it.
I love golf, and again, one of the things I say, and there are more chapters about golf in the book than any other sport, and I begin the first chapter, which is on the local golf scene, and I speak rather extensively about when I started covering Ed Perry, who was the first RIJ director, was just finishing his time, and I got to work with Ed a little bit, but Joe Sprague came in, Joe Sprague Sr., the people
Legendary.
around here, just legendary guy in both hockey and golf.
And his son, Joe.
And Joe Jr. became every bit as good as the dad. And I was a young kid, still in my 20s, when I came to the Journal, and golf became the prime beat beyond the high schools. And Joe Sprague became one of my mentors. And a lot of my philosophies of life and the way you treat people, and just Joe Sprague told me, and I repeat it in the book, that if you want to judge what kind of person a person is, it was his point, and I agree with him 100%, and I'd be willing to bet you share the opinion. Take them out on the golf course for 4 or 5 hours, see how they carry themselves, how they act. And I believe that will give you a great sense of what kind of person that man or woman, whoever it is, has nothing to do with how good or bad they are as players, but how you conduct yourself, how you follow the rules, and how you do things. And golf,
Not necessarily how well you play.
not at all. The playing ability had nothing to do with it.
Right.
Strictly with how you act.
By the way, how's your game?
I haven't made a bogey in 8 years. With my physical problems,
You just
I can't
haven't
play.
played.
I can't play.
Yeah, well,
I can't hit the ball more than 100 yards.
yeah, well, you know what? It's one way to say it. When we come back, highs and lows. Stay with us. Again, tomorrow in Barrington and Barrington Books, or wherever great books are sold, get Paul's book. You have a great weekend. We'll see you on the radio, of course, 3 to 6 on WDPR and back here on Monday night. Good night.